For exactly 43 minutes, nobody in the palace understood what had gone wrong. But millions watching did. During a carefully choreographed royal appearance, Queen Camilla stepped forward wearing a brooch no one expected, and no one had seen in decades. The smile never left her face. Yet behind her, a senior aide froze. By the time the carriage doors closed, orders were already being issued. Because this wasn't a fashion mistake, it was a breach. Before we begin, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us make more videos like this. The engagement had been designed as reassurance, a new reign, a steady monarchy, a carefully measured continuation of dignity after uncertainty. Every detail had been calibrated to project calm permanence. The greetings, the route, even the timing of the wave. Nothing was meant to surprise. And yet, within seconds of her arrival, something did. Commentators paused mid-sentence. Their voices shifted from admiration to curiosity, then to confusion. The jewel pinned near her shoulder did not belong to the rotation of familiar pieces the public had memorized over years of appearances. Inside the moving formation around her, reactions were sharper. A lady-in-waiting glanced once, then again, longer the second time. A private secretary leaned toward another staff member, not speaking, only tightening his expression. Behind practiced smiles, calculations began. This item was not scheduled, not approved, not logged for use that day. One courtier quietly redirected a planned stop, shortening the interaction with waiting dignitaries. To onlookers, it appeared courteous efficiency. Within the royal party, it felt like containment. Camilla herself appeared unaware of the tremor spreading behind her. She carried the conversation, listened, laughed lightly, fulfilling every expectation of composure. Yet those closest noticed a small moment after she returned to the carriage. A brief question asked softly, not recorded, but remembered. It was not about the crowd or the speeches. It was about the brooch. The answer she received did not calm the air. By then, phones had begun vibrating in offices across multiple residences. Messages were coded, concise, unusually direct. Confirmation requests became instructions. Instructions became decisions. Somewhere in a private archive room, an inventory entry was pulled and verified. The piece had a classification rarely invoked, restricted, not ceremonial. Its presence in public view was not merely unexpected. It contradicted a long-standing internal understanding. Within an hour, one phrase circulated quietly among senior staff, spoken carefully and only once per conversation. She wasn't meant to choose that one. The day's photographs would circulate worldwide, but inside the institution, attention shifted away from publicity toward history. The monarchy was not reacting to embarrassment. It was reacting to recognition, the sudden return of something deliberately kept dormant. But to understand why a single jewel could alarm an entire institution, we have to go back to the moment the monarchy decided some objects carry memory. And memory carries power. Hidden beneath ceremonial tradition lies a quieter monarchy. One that exists not in crowns, but in catalogs. Long before Camilla ever entered royal life, certain jewels had already been marked. Not lost, not damaged, simply withdrawn. Locked away under internal protocol, never discussed publicly, and rarely even acknowledged in private conversation. Royals inherit many things, but some pieces are not inheritance. They are warnings. The public understands the monarchy through spectacle. Coronations, balcony appearances, carefully chosen heirlooms meant to signal continuity. But inside the institution, jewels are not only ornaments, they are records. Each stone carries a context, each clasp a memory, and sometimes memory becomes complicated enough that tradition cannot safely display it again. Over decades, a classification quietly emerged. Never written into law, never admitted in interviews, yet strictly enforced. There were jewels to be worn, jewels to be reserved, and jewels never to be requested. The distinction mattered deeply. State regalia belonged to the crown as an idea, meant for visibility and reassurance. But another category existed, far smaller and infinitely more delicate. These pieces were tied not to ceremony, but to emotion, to disagreements, betrayals, reconciliations negotiated behind closed doors. Their value was not measured in diamonds, but in the events they had witnessed. When history becomes uncomfortable, the monarchy does not destroy it. It contains it. Across reigns, senior private secretaries maintained what insiders informally called the silent list. It was not circulated widely. It did not need to be. Knowledge of it passed in briefings, often delivered quietly to those marrying into the family. New members learned quickly that acceptance was partly demonstrated through restraint. There were items available for celebration and others that signaled territory not to be entered. The lesson was simple. Belonging required awareness, not possession. Senior women of the household guarded these traditions most carefully. Their role extended beyond fashion or presentation. They protected emotional continuity. A tiara could reopen old rivalries. A necklace could suggest alliances. And a brooch, small, intimate, easily overlooked, could carry meaning powerful enough to disturb relationships that had taken decades to steady. The late Queen herself reportedly reviewed certain pieces personally, not because she valued jewels above people, but because she understood how quickly symbols could speak louder than statements. When the inventory connected to the recent appearance was checked, the brooch appeared exactly where it had always remained, recorded but restricted. Its archive entry bore a notation rarely attached to any object. Not unavailable, not damaged, but withheld from circulation indefinitely. The implication was unmistakable. It was preserved for remembrance, not display. Those reading the record did not debate authenticity. They understood immediately that what had happened earlier was not a simple oversight, but the reactivation of a closed chapter. The jewel had not been forgotten. It had been protected from repetition. And among those sealed entries, one piece carried a notation unlike any other. A notation that began with another woman entirely. The brooch was never meant to be famous. It wasn't part of a coronation set, nor photographed in official portraits. Yet inside the palace, its name was spoken carefully, attached not to rank, but to a relationship. The woman who wore it did so rarely, but always deliberately. And the last time she fastened it, witnesses later recalled, she hesitated. As if she understood she was closing a chapter the monarchy would struggle to reopen. It entered the royal collection quietly, during a period when public ceremony projected harmony, while private conversations struggled to keep pace. The gift itself was modest compared to grander jewels, but its timing gave it weight. It was presented not as a symbol of power, but reassurance, offered at a moment when loyalty needed confirmation rather than celebration. Within palace memory, the brooch quickly became associated with intention. When she chose it, she was making a statement no speech could safely deliver. Those around her understood. The family itself moved carefully during those years, balancing duty against emotion, expectation against reality. The brooch appeared only when something needed to be acknowledged without being said aloud. Not triumph, not glamour, steadiness. It came to represent a fragile agreement held together by restraint. Over time, staff began recognizing its presence as a signal that circumstances behind closed doors were more complicated than official schedules suggested. Its most remembered appearance came during a gathering meant to reassure observers that unity still existed. Conversations that day were polite but measured, laughter slightly delayed, every gesture deliberate. When she arrived wearing it, senior aides exchanged glances that mixed relief with unease. The message was clear, yet incomplete. It promised stability while revealing the effort required to maintain it. Afterward, witnesses spoke of a quiet moment before departure. She reached for the clasp, paused longer than usual, and seemed to weigh the act of removing it. No announcement followed, no dramatic gesture, only the absence that came later. The brooch did not appear again. Within days, it was returned to storage, not cleaned for reuse, but catalogued differently. Something had shifted, and the institution recognized it immediately. A pivotal event followed soon after, public enough to redefine relationships, yet private enough to leave emotional consequences unresolved. From that point forward, the piece was no longer treated as part of ordinary inheritance. It was remembered as territory, mentioned rarely, requested never. Its meaning settled into quiet agreement among those who understood history without needing it explained. Over the years, the monarchy adjusted around the absence. New appearances adopted different symbols. Conversations avoided reference. The brooch remained intact but untouched, preserved not as treasure but as acknowledgement that some chapters must remain closed to keep the present stable. It became less an object than a boundary, proof that survival sometimes requires selective silence. So when decades later the same piece appeared again, not archived, not requested, but chosen, it triggered something far older than protocol. No one forced the decision. No stylist suggested it. On that morning, Camilla personally reviewed several trays of jewelry. Routine before a public appearance. She dismissed the expected pieces quickly. Then she paused. Her hand hovered. A dresser later recalled she seemed curious, not cautious. The problem wasn't that she wore the brooch. The problem was she chose it herself. The preparation followed a rhythm practiced countless times before public engagements. Options were presented in orderly sequence, each selected in advance to match tone, message, and historical balance. Normally, the process required little discussion. A nod, a brief agreement, the matter settled. That morning unfolded differently. Camilla moved past the familiar items without hesitation, almost impatiently, as if searching for something she could not name yet felt drawn toward. Among the trays sat pieces rarely requested, but still maintained for completeness. They were not hidden, yet they carried the quiet weight of being overlooked by intention. When her attention settled on the brooch, a subtle shift passed through the room. One attendant adjusted her posture. Another paused mid-movement. No one spoke. Within palace etiquette, interruption implied authority, and authority had not been granted to them. So uncertainty held its breath. She asked simply, "Why not this one?" The question itself created the tension. Junior attendants, unfamiliar with the silent list and its inherited cautions, saw no formal restriction recorded in their daily briefings. To them, it appeared unusual but permissible. A message could have been sent upward for confirmation, but time pressed forward, and hesitation became permission. The hierarchy protected the moment. No one felt empowered to deny the Queen's preference. A senior dresser entered moments later, reading the room instantly, yet arriving too late to reverse the choice, without making it visible. Protocol demanded confidence. To question publicly would create attention, and attention was exactly what tradition tried to avoid. The brooch was fastened with practiced calm, and the decision passed from private uncertainty into official reality. Those responsible for coordination assumed authorization must exist somewhere beyond their level. After all, such a selection could not occur without prior clearance, or so they believed. The monarchy depends on invisible understandings, and in that instant, every person relied on another unseen approval. The absence of objection became consensus. Only when she stepped into view did realization spread. Recognition traveled faster than explanation. Faces trained for composure held steady, while messages began forming silently behind them. The calm surface endured, yet beneath it, calculation accelerated. What had been a simple preference became an institutional question, and no one present possessed the authority to answer it. Within minutes, phones were ringing across residences, not to discuss optics, but to determine authority. Before the event had even concluded, a call was placed to the highest level of the royal household. Not about headlines, not about press reaction, about boundaries, because certain objects inside the monarchy do not belong to the wearer. They belong to the narrative the crown must control. And the question being asked was simple. Who allowed the past to walk back into the present? The message moved upward quickly, bypassing routine channels. Courtiers who rarely interrupted senior offices did so without hesitation, choosing precision over protocol. The concern was not embarrassment, but meaning. A wardrobe error could be corrected quietly, but a symbol misread could echo for years. Within minutes, senior royals were informed that a restricted piece had entered public view, and the tone of the conversation shifted from confusion to containment. Interpretation became the immediate threat. If noticed widely, observers might assign intention where none existed, or worse, uncover intention that history had already agreed to leave dormant. The monarchy survives by shaping continuity, not reopening disputes, and the brooch risked suggesting a narrative the institution had carefully neutralized over time. It did not matter that the appearance was accidental. Perception would not recognize the difference. Inside the household, responsibility became a delicate topic. Some believed the oversight lay in preparation, others in hierarchy that prevented intervention. No one wanted blame attached publicly or privately, yet clarification was unavoidable. The structure depended on invisible rules being understood instinctively, and the morning's event proved those understandings could fade across generations of staff. When the matter reached the monarch, the response carried neither anger nor surprise. It was measured, immediate, and final. The instruction was not to debate the past, but to secure the present. The brooch was to be removed at the earliest discrete moment and transferred directly into controlled storage. Not catalogued for rotation, not scheduled for future wear. Isolated. Its status changed from restricted to effectively untouchable. Orders followed quickly. Future selections would be screened more closely. Access to certain trays would narrow. And most importantly, the incident itself would vanish from conversation. Staff were advised that acknowledgement would only amplify curiosity. Silence, long practiced, would preserve stability. The monarchy would not deny the event, but it would never discuss it. By the time the day's public duties ended, the decision had settled into quiet permanence. The brooch would return to the vault, and its appearance would become an unspoken moment known only to those who had witnessed the urgency behind polite smiles. Outwardly, nothing had happened. Internally, a boundary had been reinforced. Yet the official explanation would remain silence. While privately, Camilla finally learned why the jewel had been sealed. It wasn't cursed. It wasn't politically controversial. It was worse. It was personal. The brooch marked a moment the monarchy survived but never resolved, a symbol tied to loyalty questioned, forgiveness negotiated, and wounds never publicly closed. Wearing it didn't break tradition. It reopened memory. And memory, inside an institution built on continuity, can destabilize more than scandal ever could. The explanation did not come immediately. Hours passed first, enough time for the urgency to settle into gravity. When the conversation finally happened, it was quiet and deliberate, carried out not as reprimand, but as clarification. What had appeared to her as a small and elegant choice carried emotional architecture built long before she arrived. The brooch was not about ownership. It was about a promise once tested and never fully spoken about again. Inside the family, certain moments are preserved without dates or announcements. They are remembered through objects, because words would force positions that relationships could not sustain. The brooch belonged to such a moment, a fragile agreement between public duty and private feeling. Some family members had lived through that chapter personally, and its presence revived tensions they had learned to leave undisturbed. No accusation existed, yet the discomfort was undeniable. The monarchy depends on a controlled memory, not to erase truth, but to keep continuity intact. When history is allowed to speak too loudly, it competes with the present. A jewel can therefore reshape perception more powerfully than a statement. Observers might never know the context, yet instinctively they sense meaning, and meaning invites interpretation. That was the danger. Not outrage, not scandal, suggestion. As the significance unfolded, understanding replaced surprise. She reportedly listened more than she spoke, recognizing that the peace had been sealed not out of hostility, but preservation. The past had not been hidden, it had been stabilized. Wearing it had unknowingly reopened a conversation the institution had already concluded in silence. The weight of that realization changed the moment from incident to lesson. The request made afterward was simple. The brooch would remain untouched, not forbidden in anger, but protected from repetition. Agreement followed without resistance, because the explanation reframed the choice entirely. It was no longer a matter of preference, but respect for a delicate balance built over decades. Some heirlooms affirm belonging. Others demand restraint. From that day forward, its classification hardened. The archive did not remove it, nor relocate it, but its status became permanent. It would remain part of the collection, yet absent from ceremony. A memory preserved, but never performed. Within the household, the understanding settled naturally, the way long-standing customs do once they are recognized rather than enforced. But the public never knew any of this. They only sensed something had shifted in how she appeared afterward. After that day, watchers noticed a pattern. Camilla's jewelry choices became unusually careful, almost historically neutral. Pieces associated with past emotional chapters never reappeared. It was as though she had learned an invisible map of boundaries. Because inside the royal family, acceptance is rarely declared. It is demonstrated through what you choose not to wear. The change was not announced, yet it was unmistakable to those who had followed royal appearances long enough to read subtlety. Familiar pieces began repeating more often, safe heirlooms with uncomplicated histories. Their selection projected steadiness rather than individuality. Nothing controversial, nothing interpretive. The effect was calm, almost deliberate in its restraint, as if each engagement carried an unspoken promise. Continuity would outweigh expression. Privately, coordination became more precise. Advisors did not dictate, but they guided gently, presenting options already filtered through institutional memory. Suggestions arrived framed as practicality, balance, harmony, tradition, yet the result was unmistakable consistency. There were no abrupt corrections, no visible prohibitions. Instead, alignment formed gradually, until preference and protocol moved together without friction. Observers in the press sensed the adjustment, even if they could not explain it. Articles described a shift toward classic presentation, praising elegance while unknowingly noting absence. They commented on repetition without recognizing purpose. The language used was aesthetic, but the meaning behind it was relational. Something had changed, and the monarchy preferred it remain understood rather than examined. Within the household, the atmosphere settled. Senior courtiers measured stability not by what appeared, but by what no longer did. Restraint communicated respect more clearly than apology ever could. The brooch itself vanished from conversation as effectively as from view. No photograph recorded it again, not because it was hidden, but because it no longer belonged to public narrative. Over time, jewelry became a quiet language of reconciliation. Choices affirmed awareness. Familiar heirlooms carried reassurance across generations, signaling continuity stronger than any statement. Each appearance reinforced belonging through consideration, demonstrating that understanding the past meant protecting the present from reopening it. Camilla adapted naturally to this rhythm. What began as correction evolved into instinct. The boundaries ceased feeling imposed, and instead became part of participation in an institution defined by memory. Acceptance arrived not through declaration, but through fluency, knowing which histories to honor silently. And yet, the most revealing part of the story isn't the ban, but why the monarchy keeps objects that powerful at all. In most families, painful objects are hidden away or discarded. In the monarchy, they are preserved, catalogued, guarded, remembered. Because the crown doesn't erase its past, it archives it. Every restricted jewel is a chapter the institution refuses to rewrite, but refuses to relive. The brooch remains in the vault not as punishment, but as a boundary. One future generations will also be warned about. The difference between personal memory and institutional memory defines the monarchy more than any crown ever could. Individuals remember through emotion, often reshaping recollection to survive it. The crown remembers through structure. It preserves the moment exactly as it was, neither softened nor dramatized, because continuity depends on accuracy. The brooch exists within that structure, not as a relic of regret, but as evidence of a fragile equilibrium once negotiated and carefully maintained. For the family, time moves forward. Relationships adapt. Forgiveness evolves, and new roles form around old wounds. For the institution, time folds inward. Every reign inherits not only authority, but unresolved chapters, each one held safely in objects that speak without words. The monarchy does not allow history to vanish. It contains it so the present can remain stable. Symbols therefore carry authority beyond the people who wear them. They do not represent preference. They represent consequence. Future members learn this gradually. Briefings rarely sound dramatic, yet their meaning is unmistakable. Certain heirlooms celebrate lineage. Others teach restraint. The brooch now belongs to the second category, not forbidden in anger, but explained with care. It becomes part of education, a quiet example passed along so that understanding precedes repetition. The goal is not secrecy for its own sake, but prevention. Tradition acts as memory's safeguard. By preserving objects instead of discarding them, the crown avoids reliving conflict. Each generation inherits awareness rather than confusion. Stability becomes a shared responsibility, maintained through small decisions that rarely reach public notice. Personal expression yields to collective continuity, not because individuality lacks value, but because the monarchy survives only when its narrative remains steady across time. The brooch, therefore, changed meaning. Once a participant in emotional history, It became instruction. Its classification moved beyond ceremony into lesson, a reminder that belonging within the institution requires not only presence, but perception. Understanding the past allows the present to function without reopening it. Because in the end, Camilla didn't lose access to a jewel. She was entrusted with understanding the monarchy itself. She wore it once, never again. And strangely, that single mistake may have marked the moment she finally became part of the institution she entered so controversially. Not by claiming history, but by respecting its boundaries. The brooch wasn't taken from her. It was the final rule she learned. In the monarchy, belonging isn't granted when you wear the jewels, but when you know which ones not to. In the weeks that followed, nothing outwardly dramatic occurred. Appearances continued, ceremonies unfolded, and public rhythm remained steady. Yet privately, the incident reframed her relationship with the past she had inherited. Before, history had been something surrounding her, discussed, debated, occasionally defended. Afterward, it became something she actively protected. The distinction was subtle but decisive. She was no longer navigating the institution. She was helping preserve it. Restraint replaced uncertainty. Every choice began to signal understanding rather than adaptation. Those who had once watched cautiously now watched differently, measuring not acceptance granted, but acceptance demonstrated. The monarchy rarely offers confirmation. It recognizes consistency. Over time, the absence of controversy became its own affirmation. The lesson had settled. Within palace corridors, the story evolved into a quiet reference point. Not mentioned directly, never recorded formally, yet understood by those entrusted with continuity. The brooch became less an object than a shared memory, proof that tradition is not maintained through enforcement, but comprehension. It was not spoken of as an error. It was remembered as recognition. Her position subtly shifted. Where she had once entered rooms aware of judgment, she now entered as part of the structure that prevented future conflict. The outsider narrative faded, replaced by a quieter role, guardian of balance. Understanding the emotional architecture of the institution granted authority more lasting than any public endorsement. The object itself remained untouched, but its meaning expanded. It no longer represented tension. It represented continuity achieved through awareness. Future generations would not see it worn, yet they would learn its significance, not as warning, but as instruction, a reminder that the monarchy survives by honoring memory without reliving it. No announcement closed the chapter. No statement clarified the moment. Stability rarely requires explanation. The quiet resolution endured precisely because it stayed unspoken, existing only in practice and perception, where the monarchy has always lived most securely. And so the brooch rested, unchanged yet transformed, its story completed not through display, but through understanding.